I never expected my neighbor Dorothy to change my life over a pot roast dinner. We'd lived next door to each other for 3 years, exchanging polite waves across our driveways but never really talking. She was a widow in her early 60s, always impeccably dressed even when checking her mailbox. I was pushing 58, divorced for a decade, and had grown comfortable with my solitude. That Tuesday evening in late September, I was in my kitchen preparing what had become my specialty over the years. A proper pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the kind my mother used to make on Sunday afternoons when I was young. The aroma filled every corner of my house, rich and comforting, reminding me of simpler times when family gathered around tables and conversation flowed as freely as sweet tea. I had just pulled the roast from the oven when my doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was Dorothy, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked uncertain. Her silver hair was still perfectly styled, but there was something vulnerable in her eyes. "I'm terribly sorry to bother you," she said, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself despite the warm evening. "But I could smell your cooking from my kitchen window, and I just had to tell you how wonderful it smells." "Thank you," I said, genuinely pleased. "It's just pot roast, nothing fancy," she smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "My late husband Robert used to make pot roast every Sunday. It was his one dish, the only thing I really knew how to cook, but I made it with such love." She paused, looking down at her hands. "I haven't had a proper pot roast in 4 years, not since I passed." Something in the way she said it touched a place deep in my chest. I thought about all those evenings I'd eaten alone at my kitchen table, scrolling through my phone, the television providing background noise to fill the silence. I thought about how we can live right next to people and never really know them, never really see them. "Dorothy," I said, making a decision that felt both spontaneous and absolutely right, "would you like to join me for dinner?" I made far too much for one person, and honestly, I'd appreciated the company. Her eyes widened with surprise, then filled with something that looked like relief. "Are you certain? I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing," I assured her. "Please, come in." She stepped into my home with the careful grace of someone who'd been invited into something sacred. And in a way, I suppose she had been. We'd both been living behind our walls of politeness and privacy, protecting ourselves from the vulnerability that comes with truly connecting with another person. I set the table properly, using the good plates I'd been saving for occasions that never seemed to arrive. I poured us each a glass of red wine, and we sat down together as the golden evening light filtered through my kitchen windows. "This looks absolutely beautiful," Dorothy said softly, and I could hear the emotion in her voice. As we began to eat, the conversation started slowly, like a stream finding its path after a long drought. We talked about the neighborhood, about the young family that had just moved in down the street, about how different everything seemed from when we were young. Then, gradually, we began sharing the real stories. Dorothy told me about Robert, about their 42 years together, about how some mornings she still woke up expecting to see him there. She spoke about the loneliness that had crept into her life like fog, so gradual she barely noticed it until she was completely surrounded. I told her about my divorce, about how I'd retreated into myself afterward, building walls I'd convinced myself were protection but had really become a prison. I talked about my children, now grown and living across the country, and how I missed the noise and chaos of a full house even though I'd once yearned for peace and quiet. "You know what I've learned," Dorothy said, taking a sip of her wine. "We spend so much of our lives trying to be strong, trying to prove we don't need anyone. But needing people isn't weakness. It's what makes us human." Her words settled over me like a warm blanket. She was right, of course. In our efforts to be independent and self-sufficient, we'd both become isolated. We'd mistaken solitude for strength. "This pot roast," she said, savoring another bite, "tastes just like Robert, siglo. Maybe even better." She smiled at me, and this time it reached her eyes. "But you know what makes it truly special? It's sharing it with someone who understands." We talked late into the evening, long after the dishes were cleared and the wine bottle was empty. We discovered we both loved old movies, that we'd both been teachers at different points in our lives, that we both missed the ritual of Sunday dinners when food was more than sustenance. It was connection, tradition, love made tangible. When Dorothy finally stood to leave, she took both my hands in hers. Thank you, she said. You have no idea what this evening meant to me. I was so lonely I could barely breathe sometimes, but I didn't know how to reach out. I didn't want to be a burden. You're not a burden, I said fiercely. And I was lonely too. I just didn't want to admit it. She hugged me then, and I realized how long it had been since I'd truly embraced another person. After that evening, everything changed. Dorothy and I developed a routine. We'd have dinner together twice a week, alternating houses. She'd bring her famous apple pie, and I'd make my pot roast or try new recipes I'd found. We'd watch classic films on Friday nights, sharing popcorn and commentary like teenagers at a sleepover. But more than that, we became friends. Real friends. The kind who could call each other at 2 in the morning when sleep wouldn't come, who could share comfortable silences as easily as lengthy conversations, who could be vulnerable without fear of judgment. Dorothy introduced me to her book club, and I invited her to join my morning walks. Slowly, our circles of connection expanded. We were no longer isolated individuals living parallel lives. We were part of a community again. One evening, almost a year after that first dinner, Dorothy and I were sitting on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. I was so afraid that day, she admitted quietly. When I rang your doorbell, part of me wanted to run away before you answered. I'm so glad you didn't, I said. Me too, she replied. You know what I've realized? Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is admit we need someone. And sometimes the kindest thing we can do is let someone know they're not alone. She was right, as she so often was. In reaching out, Dorothy had given us both a gift. She'd reminded me that life isn't meant to be lived in isolation, that there's profound courage in vulnerability, and that it's never too late to open your door and your heart to connection. Now, as I prepare pot roast, I always make enough for two. And I never take for granted the blessing of a neighbor who became a friend, who taught me that the most nourishing thing we can offer each other isn't food. It's presence, understanding, and the simple acknowledgement that we all need someone sometimes. And that's not weakness, that's being human.